Billionaire CEO insults black waitress stupid, and lost 3.5B deal on the spot. Under chandeliers glowing like captured stars, the Four Seasons Beverly Hills brimmed with wealth and whispers. Wine breathed from crystal glasses, jazz curled through the air like smoke. Then, silence. A single slip of Bordeaux slid down a billionaire's sleeve, the kind of accident no one should remember. Yet the moment Victor Langston opened his mouth, history rewrote itself. His words didn't just insult. They detonated. "Don't touch me, you stupid black girl." They hung heavy, raw, burning through marble floors and polished smiles. For a breathless second, the ballroom froze. Cameras tilted. Fingers tightened around phones. Millions of unseen eyes were already waiting. Amara Jones, the waitress he mocked, didn't bow her head. She stood taller, her gaze unshaken, her presence louder than his fortune. Around her, powerful men and women blinked, torn between fear of a tycoon and the gravity of truth laid bare. What no one in that hall knew was that Amara was not just a server carrying trays. Her connection to the most powerful man in the room would shatter egos, crush fortunes, and flip the night into something the world would never forget. Victor thought he was untouchable. By sunrise, he would be stripped of everything, a $3.5 billion deal dangled by a thread, about to snap in front of a global stage. The question wasn't if Victor would fall, it was how fast. And the one person he underestimated most was about to decide his fate. What unfolds after this moment will not only shock you, it will make you rethink what real power looks like. Amara Jones never sought the spotlight, but life kept forcing her into stages where strength was the only performance she could give. At 27, she carried herself with the poise of someone who had already lived 3 lifetimes of responsibility. Her story did not begin under chandeliers or in ballrooms filled with crystal laughter. It started in the muted hum of hospital machines, the cold fluorescent glow that marked her mother's final months. Cancer stripped her family of certainty, and in its place left a girl who became a mother, a sister, and a guardian in one breath. Jamal was only 9 when their mother passed, his body already bent under the constraints of cerebral palsy, yet his eyes radiated a joy that defied every limitation. Amara was 18 then, a debate star whose voice could slice through arguments like a blade, winning scholarships, medals, and the admiration of teachers who whispered she was bound for greatness. But when death knocked on the small apartment door, medals could not pay rent, trophies could not buy groceries, and speeches could not replace the warmth of a mother's hands. So Amara shelved her dreams, not in bitterness but in resolve, and turned every ounce of her energy toward Jamal. Nights were long, often filled with the sound of coughing, the squeak of his wheelchair, or the quiet despair of bills stacked like bricks around their tiny kitchen. Yet she smiled for him, painted murals of possibility across the cramped walls of their life, and told him bedtime stories not about fairy tales, but about dignity, perseverance, and the quiet rebellion of hope. Her shield was invisibility. She learned how to blend into crowds, how to disappear into corners, watching powerful men and women move pieces across society's chessboard. Where others might feel small, Amara found purpose in observing. The quiet gave her space to study how influence flowed, who deferred to whom, what silences carried more weight than speeches, and how a careless insult could destroy reputations. She realized early that true power was not always loud. Sometimes it lived in the pause before a sentence, in the tilt of a head, in the restraint of a hand. And while money filled rooms, character defined legacies. That became her private obsession, to decode power not for wealth, but for wisdom. Working at elite events was her chosen classroom. The Four Seasons Beverly Hills, the Ritz-Carlton downtown, the Bel Air mansions with their infinity pools stretching into the horizon. These were her lecture halls. Her black uniform, neatly pressed, became a kind of cloak that made her invisible, yet omnipresent. She carried trays of vintage Bordeaux and Dom Perignon, not because she needed the paycheck, though it helped keep Jamal's therapy sessions funded, but because these settings allowed her to see humanity stripped bare. Alcohol loosened tongues, greed widened eyes, arrogance sharpened voices. She learned more about leadership, corruption, and morality from serving caviar at midnight than she ever had from textbooks. Still, the weight was real. Buses groaned under her exhausted body after 12-hour shifts. Winter winds cut through her thin coat as she wheeled Jamal across cracked sidewalks, his laughter lighting up the dark like a lantern. He was her anchor, his optimism reminding her that sacrifice was not suffering when it was done for love. Once, when she collapsed onto the couch after a brutal week, Jamal whispered, "You're stronger than any superhero." Those words etched themselves into her bones. She never wore a cape, but she carried resilience like armor. Flashbacks haunted her in quiet moments. The sterile smell of antiseptic would pull her back to her mother's hospital bed, where she promised, with tears carving lines down her cheeks, that Jamal would never be alone. She remembered skipping prom to work double shifts, watching friends glide into college while she learned how to manage seizures, wheelchairs, and Medicaid paperwork. Yet she never envied them. Life had demanded a different script from her, and she performed it with grace. If others defined success by titles and wealth, Amara defined it by keeping promises. And she never broke one. That night at the Four Seasons, as the chandeliers scattered light like diamonds across polished marble, Amara's past and present coexisted. To the wealthy patrons, she was a nameless server, refilling glasses with seamless precision. But beneath the uniform was a woman forged in fire, her spirit tempered by hardship, her eyes absorbing every flicker of arrogance and humility that danced through the room. Her movements were deliberate, not hurried, as if each step was a choice. Each gesture a declaration that dignity does not depend on status. Guests barely noticed her, but Elias Voss did. From the head table, the silver-haired investor watched the way she carried herself, how her composure never wavered even when confronted with rudeness disguised as casual dismissal. To Elias, presence spoke louder than position. Amara's invisibility was her strategy. It allowed her to map networks of influence with precision, to see which CEOs leaned on which investors, which assistants wielded more actual control than their bosses, which jokes revealed prejudice hidden under designer suits. She stored these observations like treasures, knowing one day she would use them not for revenge, but for transformation. Her ambition was not to climb into power, but to reshape it, to remind those who held it that humanity was the actual currency. On breaks. She often slipped into the service corridor, where peeling paint and the smell of detergent replaced the ballroom's perfume. There she would lean against the wall, close her eyes, and remind herself that her brother's smile was waiting at home. She sent him videos of the chandeliers, the golden staircases, the flower arrangements taller than people, narrating them. With a laugh, "See, Jamal? Someday we'll host our own event in a place like this, except with better music." He would respond with emojis and encouragement, his texts riddled with typos, but overflowing with faith. Those exchanges refueled, her turning fatigue into fuel. Her colleagues admired her calmness. When others snapped under pressure, Amara never raised her voice. She believed respect was not a reaction, but a decision. Yet beneath the serenity was a fire. Injustice enraged her, though she rarely showed it. She had seen enough of life's brutality to understand that anger wasted in small battles only weakened you for the wars that mattered. Patience was her rebellion. Silence was her power. The contrast between her life and the grandeur she navigated daily was stark. Their apartment walls bore cracks, yet they carried more love than most mansions. She could not afford couture dresses, yet she walked with elegance no designer could stitch. Her shoes were practical, not polished leather, but they had carried her through storms, buses, and hospital hallways. And though she wore no jewels, the quiet light in her eyes was more radiant than diamonds. That evening, as she moved through the ballroom, she felt the subtle shift of energy. Deals whispered at tables carried the weight of nations. Victor Langston's booming laughter ricocheted across the room, his presence dominating like a storm cloud. She noted how guests catered to him, how even seasoned investors adjusted their posture when he approached. Power made people bend, yet Amara did not. She remained steady, her tray balanced, her gaze unwavering. In that steadiness lived her defiance, though no one recognized it. Not yet. For Amara, each night of service was a study in character, and she knew something others forgot. Arrogance always plants the seeds of downfall. She did not yet know how quickly those seeds would sprout in front of her eyes. She only knew that the man who commanded the ballroom with his arrogance was about to collide with a truth he could not control. The balance of the evening hung by a thread, and she stood at the center, invisible but indispensable, unseen yet unforgettable. Soon, Victor Langston would learn that the woman he dismissed was the lesson he most needed. Victor Langston thrived in shadows disguised as brilliance. At 40, he wore success like an armor, stitched from Italian wool and arrogance, polished with curated charm designed for magazine covers. People called him visionary, but beneath that surface lay something colder. A man who built his empire not through invention, but through domination. Langston Dynamics was less a symbol of innovation than a fortress of control, where every employee understood the cost of hesitation. He rose not by lifting others, but by stepping over them, his reputation forged in firings, lawsuits quietly buried, and fear disguised as respect. His office in downtown Los Angeles reflected his philosophy. Floor-to-ceiling glass gave him a view of the city stretched like a conquered kingdom. Polished black marble reflected light so sharply that it hurt to look at it. Behind his desk sat not family portraits but awards, magazine covers, industry plaques, and framed headlines that praised his aggressive expansion. The decor was sterile, intentionally so. He believed warmth distracted from authority. Anyone invited into that space felt instantly small, forced to sit in leather chairs that seemed to sag in submission under his glare. Colleagues joked quietly that his office was more courtroom than workspace, and Victor was both judge and executioner. In public, he mastered charisma. At galas, his smile was precise, his words calculated to impress investors who mistook confidence for genius. He shook hands with firmness bordering on threat. Cameras captured him as a man in command, but few saw the fury that simmered beneath every controlled gesture. When employees faltered, even slightly, his reprimands came like knives wrapped in silk. "We don't have room for mediocrity," he would say, though his empire's core ideas were borrowed from competitors, refined only through scale and ruthlessness. Innovation required vision. Victor preferred conquest. At the Four Seasons ballroom, that philosophy followed him. Tailored suit cut sharp across broad shoulders, cufflinks engraved with his initials catching candlelight, shoes gleaming like mirrors. He arrived as if the room belonged to him. Staff stiffened when he passed. Even those who had never met him recognized the aura, a domineering presence that demanded silence before he spoke. Conversations paused when he drew near, not out of admiration, but instinct. Victor had a way of sucking air from spaces, of reminding everyone that wealth could shout louder than dignity. His journey to this point was not a tale of hardship overcome, but of opportunities seized and morals discarded. Born into privilege, he inherited capital from a father who built factories overseas, exploiting loopholes to cut costs at the expense of laborers. Instead of distancing himself, Victor perfected the formula. He treated people like assets, expendable once their utility ended. Interns cycled through Langston dynamics like clockwork, discarded after long hours with little recognition. Executives survived only if they mirrored his philosophy of fear. To him, leadership was not about guidance, but about control. Respect was demanded, not earned. Victor's flaws multiplied as his power grew. He loved being underestimated in deals, only to crush rivals with legal traps or sudden buyouts. Critics called him ruthless, but he embraced the label, once bragging at a shareholders meeting, "Compassion is costly. We deal in results." The line trended on social media, half in admiration, half in disgust. He never cared which side people fell on, as long as they kept speaking his name. For Victor, silence was failure. Infamy was still power. Those close to him understood another truth. His cruelty wasn't just a strategy, it was a habit. He fired a receptionist once for bringing him the wrong brand of bottled water, citing lack of attention to detail. He humiliated a manager during a conference call for pausing too long before answering a question. Even at dinners like this one, he treated service staff as furniture, obstacles between him and whatever deal hovered over the table. To him, hierarchy was the natural order of life, and he stood proudly at the top, immune to consequence. The irony was that he cultivated an image of philanthropy for the public. Charities carried his name, schools bore his donations, and hospitals displayed his sponsorship plaques. Yet employees whispered that the money he gave away was little compared to what he siphoned through tax loopholes. He called it efficiency. Others called it manipulation. His face graced glossy magazines with captions like "America's Relentless Builder," though those who worked under him used darker words: tyrant, bully, predator. Inside the ballroom that evening, his behavior reflected years of unchecked authority. He laughed too loudly, dismissed opposing ideas with a flick of his hand, and treated conversation as a battlefield. When Amara spilled wine, his mask cracked. The insult was not new for him. Disdain often slipped from his mouth, but rarely in such public fashion. He underestimated the moment, blind to the weight his words carried in a world where every phone was a camera, every whisper a headline waiting to explode. To Victor, Amara was just another invisible worker. He saw only the uniform, not the human behind it. His empire had trained him to believe in categories. Investors mattered, rivals were obstacles, and employees were tools. Waitstaff were beneath acknowledgement. So when he spoke the slur, he assumed the room would bend, just as his boardrooms did. What he failed to understand was that arrogance blinds and blindness breeds downfall. The $3.5 billion deal hovering above the evening depended on perception, trust, and dignity, qualities he had long ignored. In his office, he often boasted to Elias Voss that humanity is overrated in business. Elias never argued aloud, but he remembered. Tonight, those words lingered like a ghost between them, waiting for their echo. Victor did not notice the investor's silence. He was too accustomed to owning the narrative, to being the loudest voice. Yet silence, in that moment, spoke louder than him. Victor's story was one of missed lessons. He mistook fear for loyalty, intimidation for leadership, and cruelty for strength. The same patterns that built Langston dynamics now stood poised to dismantle it. He had never considered that those deemed lesser could hold the keys to his undoing. That arrogance was his blind spot, one that no amount of wealth could shield. As the evening tightened around him, his polished exterior remained intact, but cracks widened underneath. Elias's measured gaze, the collective discomfort of the crowd, the phones quietly recording, it was all there, warning signs flashing like neon. Yet Victor continued, confident that money insulated him from consequence. He was wrong. His downfall was not arriving with a bang, but unfolding slowly, each insult adding weight to the collapse. Ever met someone who believed cruelty was a right earned by wealth? Someone who thought power excused humiliation? Share your story below, because arrogance may shine for a moment, but dignity outlasts empires. The Four Seasons ballroom shimmered like a jewel under the weight of expectation. Chandeliers spilled golden light across polished mahogany tables where crystal glasses caught fire in their curves, scattering sparks of brilliance into corners, darkened by shadows. A warm evening breeze drifted through the French doors, stirring candle flames that bent and straightened like dancers obeying silent music. Outside, Beverly Hills pulsed with cars and neon, but here, inside this enclave, of wealth, time slowed to the rhythm of a string quartet. Each note fell like droplets in still water, delicate yet deliberate, reminding every guest that moments here mattered more than most. Around the room gathered men and women accustomed to power. Senators disguised their ambition with smiles. Celebrities leaned close to financiers, whispering about investments rather than films. Lawyers and CEOs brushed shoulders with philanthropists whose generosity carried as much calculation as kindness. Servers floated through the maze of voices with trays heavy with Bordeaux, Dom Perignon, and dishes adorned like works of art. The air hummed with unspoken deals, promises half-formed, alliances weighed like coins on invisible scales. Everyone knew one truth. Fortunes could rise or collapse with a single glance, a misplaced word, or a silence too long. At the center of this fragile architecture sat Elias Voss, 70 years old, with silver hair brushed neatly back. His posture radiated calm authority. He spoke little, but when he did, people leaned forward, afraid to miss syllables shaped with precision. His black tuxedo was classic, understated compared to the flamboyance of others, yet it carried an elegance no jewel could match. He had long ago learned that those who spoke least often commanded most. Eyes followed him, not because he demanded it, but because power gravitated naturally to his stillness. The $3.5 billion acquisition of Langston Dynamics hovered above the night like a phantom. No contracts signed yet, no press releases drafted, but whispers of the deal fluttered at every table. For Victor Langston, it meant expansion, validation, and another notch carved into his empire. For Elias, it meant control of an enterprise, whose influence reached deep into technology, logistics, and defense. Yet unlike Victor, Elias weighed decisions not on ego, but on legacy. His fortune was already cemented, his reputation spanning decades of quiet yet decisive investments. This deal was not about need, it was about vision, and Elias guarded his vision with care. The atmosphere around him shifted constantly. Investors from New York pressed him with subtle flattery, European bankers offered insights laced with persuasion, while corporate lobbyists hovered like bees near honey. But Elias responded only with measured nods, his expression revealing nothing. His silence was a mirror in which others revealed themselves, exposing greed, fear, or desperation. He had inherited that discipline from his father, a Holocaust survivor, who taught him that restraint was strength and dignity was wealth no one could steal. Tonight, he carried those lessons like armor, deflecting manipulation with a calm no storm could shake. The quartet played a softer movement, violins painting tension across the air. Candles threw shadows on the high ceiling, and servers refilled. glasses with gestures so smooth they seemed choreographed. Victor Langston, ever restless, dominated his circle, laughter booming too loud, hands slicing the air in broad gestures meant to display confidence. To many, his energy filled the room. To Elias, it reeked of desperation, cloaked as bravado. He had seen men like Victor before, conquerors blinded by their own reflection, mistaking arrogance for authority. Deals with such men were dangerous, not because they lacked resources, but because they lacked restraint. As courses arrived, lobster glazed with saffron butter, truffle risotto, wagyu tender enough to cut with a fork, the room leaned further, into its choreography of wealth. Yet beneath the polished silverware and designer gowns ran an undercurrent of unease. Everyone knew eyes outside these walls waited. Markets shifted on whispers. Social media turned seconds into spectacles. A stumble here could become a headline before dessert. It was not only a dinner. It was a theater, with every guest, both actor and audience, rehearsing lines that could not falter. Elias watched without hurry. He noted the tremor in a banker's hand as he lifted a glass, the subtle exchange of glances between lawyers at opposite ends of the hall, the impatience flashing in Victor's eyes when conversation drifted too far from him. Elias believed accurate observation required not only eyes, but patience. He saw the dynamics of the room as a chessboard, and tonight, every piece inched toward an inevitable collision. He recognized the weight of his role. Without his signature, Langston Dynamics would remain vulnerable. With it, Victor would stand, taller. The decision balanced not on financial logic, but on moral instinct, though few realized it. Servers continued weaving between tables, carrying trays like constellations. Among them was Amara, silent yet graceful, her movement steady despite the hum of chaos. Elias's gaze drifted toward her more than once, not from suspicion, but from recognition of something rare. Composure unshaken by disdain. He saw how she absorbed the arrogance around her without letting it pierce her calm. It reminded him of lessons long etched into his bones, that dignity was not measured by wealth, but by resilience. While others overlooked her, Elias did not. Power often revealed itself in unexpected places, and he was practiced at noticing. Conversations swelled and ebbed like tides. Numbers were whispered, promises hinted, alliances sketched in language meant to vanish by morning if necessary. Yet, one truth underpinned them all. Everyone sought Elias's approval. He held the fulcrum on which the $3.5 billion deal balanced. Even Victor, with all his bluster, stole glances toward Elias, gauging whether laughter softened or silence sharpened. The billionaire's bravado faltered ever so slightly when the older man remained impassive. Elias knew it, though he offered no satisfaction. Power revealed itself, not by grasping, but by waiting. The tension in the room deepened as dessert neared. The quartet's music swelled, voices grew louder, yet beneath it all pulsed awareness that one decision could ripple across continents. Employees of Langston Dynamics, though absent, unknowingly awaited a verdict that would shape their futures. Markets in Tokyo, Frankfurt, and London would respond within hours. The ballroom was a crucible where wealth and arrogance clashed with patience and foresight. And Elias, seated calmly with his hands folded, embodied the still center of that storm. As candles burned lower and the night pressed against the glass windows, the stakes sharpened. Every guest knew history might mark this evening. Some leaned eagerly toward opportunity, others recoiled from potential scandal, but all remained tethered to Elias's silence. In that stillness lived judgment. Heavier than any word Victor Langston could thunder across the room. The deal hovered, fragile, waiting to be sealed or shattered. And though no one yet realized it, the balance was already shifting, not with numbers, but with dignity. The air inside the ballroom shifted from elegance to unease the moment Victor Langston's voice cracked through the calm. Moments earlier, the quartet had carried a light melody, violins weaving comfort across mahogany tables. Now the sound felt distant, fragile, as if even music sensed danger in the room. Amara Jones moved with the quiet discipline of someone who had mastered invisibility, carrying her tray as though it were an extension of her own grace. She approached Victor's table again, aware of his booming presence, his laughter that rang too loud, his gestures that carved the air like blades. She bent slightly, pouring Bordeaux with steady hands, careful as always. Yet fate does not bend for caution. A single drop leapt from the bottle's mouth, catching the glow of chandeliers before landing darkly against Victor's tailored jacket. Red blossomed like a wound on the crisp fabric. For a breath, silence fell. Amara inhaled sharply, then lowered her eyes. "I'm so sorry, sir. I'll take care of it immediately." Her voice was calm, even gentle, though her heart pounded. She reached for a napkin, but before she could blot the stain, Victor's hand shot forward. His fingers clamped around her wrist with a force that betrayed not anger alone, but habit, an instinct born from entitlement. He leaned close, his words low but sharp enough to slice. "Wait until I'm done, like the help should." The phrase cut through the air. Eyes snapped toward them. Conversations halted. Glasses lingered mid-air, forks suspended above plates. Silence screamed louder than the quartet's strings. Some guests looked away, discomfort pressing into their chests. Others stared openly, phones already angled discreetly toward the unfolding scene. The ballroom, moments before a sanctuary of wealth, had become a theater of cruelty. Amara froze, not from fear but from calculation. She did not jerk her wrist free, though the pressure burned. Instead, she straightened her posture, her chin lifting slightly as her dark eyes locked onto his. Her silence spoke louder than any protest could have. It was not submission, it was defiance cloaked in dignity. Her calm radiated across the table, unsettling even those too accustomed to Victor's behavior to question it. Victor smirked, mistaking composure for weakness. He released her slowly, fingers uncoiling as if dismissing an object rather than a person. He dabbed half-heartedly at the stain, muttering about incompetence, his voice loud enough for half the hall to hear. "Unbelievable. Even simple tasks are too much." He glanced toward Elias Voss at the head table, hoping to mask insecurity with bravado. Elias, however, remained still, his gaze unreadable, his silence heavier than any reprimand. The quartet faltered, bow strokes momentarily uneven before regaining rhythm. Yet the harmony no longer matched the mood. The entire hall pulsed with tension, each guest caught between the etiquette of politeness and the raw discomfort of prejudice displayed openly. Phones captured angles Victor did not notice. Lenses catching the flash of his hand gripping Amara, the disdain etched in his expression, the serenity in hers. Clips destined for the world's stage were already being recorded, history preserved before the night had even ended. Amara stepped back, her wrist throbbing, yet her voice remained composed. "Would you like me to bring fresh linen, sir?" The question, polite and professional, cut through the silence with its calm strength. For those listening, the tone was unmistakable. She had not crumbled. She had not lashed out. She had steadied herself, an anchor against his storm. That poise unsettled more than anger ever could. A murmur spread across nearby tables, hushed but undeniable. Victor scoffed, waving her away with a flick. "Just stay out of my sight." He turned back toward his companions, forcing laughter, but the sound rang hollow. The confidence he projected minutes earlier now cracked at the edges. He did not realize the damage was already irreversible. In a room filled with cameras and influence, moments are not forgotten. They are magnified. Elias watched quietly, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly. His fork rested untouched beside his plate, hands folded with a calm that disguised intensity. He had seen arrogance destroy men before, but rarely so quickly, rarely so publicly. His gaze lingered on Amara, noting her control, the quiet fire in her stillness. Dignity, he thought, cannot be bought, and tonight it had revealed itself in the woman Victor tried to diminish. Around the ballroom, the energy shifted. Guests whispered behind manicured hands. A senator frowned, his aide typing furiously beneath the table. A socialite raised her phone higher, ensuring the scene found its way online. Even the waitstaff, trained to remain neutral, exchanged glances heavy with unspoken solidarity. The weight of collective judgment pressed against Victor, though he remained oblivious. He believed wealth insulated him, blind to the fact that technology and conscience together carried more power than money. Amara withdrew into the service corridor for a moment, her wrist tingling from his grip. She leaned against cool plaster, breathing deeply. She thought of Jamal, his laughter, his faith in her strength. She remembered her mother's promise, etched into her bones. Never let cruelty define you. She closed her eyes, steadied her pulse, and walked back into the storm. Her return was seamless, her tray lifted with precision, her expression serene. Guests noticed. Elias noticed. Even the quartet, mid-phrase, seemed to adjust their tempo to her rhythm. Victor's circle tried to recover. They forced jokes, clinked glasses, and exaggerated their cheer. But their laughter felt strained, their movements rehearsed. They knew, even if Victor did not, that something irreversible had unfolded. His words and actions had crossed a threshold, and the room would not forget. The stain on his jacket mattered. Less than the stain on his reputation, a mark cameras had already carried far beyond the ballroom's walls. In that tension lived a lesson. Arrogance collides with dignity, and dignity does not shatter. It holds, it steadies, it outlasts. Amara had shown this truth without raising her voice, without breaking her calm. She had reminded every watching, soul that power rooted in cruelty is brittle, while strength rooted in respect is unbreakable. Have you ever stayed calm under disrespect, holding your dignity when others tried to strip it away? Tell us how in the comments, because grace under fire is the kind of strength that reshapes the world. Elias Voss sat like a stone at the head of the table, his presence calm yet immovable, the kind of stillness that unsettled louder men. At 70, his frame carried the weight of time, but none of its weakness. His back remained straight, hands folded loosely over a linen napkin, eyes fixed forward without betraying thought. To the casual observer, he was simply an elder financier enjoying another evening among society's elite. To those who truly knew him, silence was never absence, but intent. Every pause, every withheld word carried more meaning than speeches, shouted across marble halls. Tonight, his silence grew heavier with each breath, and though no one dared say it aloud, they all felt its gravity. The incident with Amara had shifted the energy of the ballroom, tilting its delicate balance. Victor's words still lingered like smoke after a fire, acrid and unforgettable. Elias had heard many men belittle others in his lifetime, but rarely with such reckless disregard in such a fragile moment. Deals were not sealed with contracts alone. They were built on trust, perception, and the unspoken belief that dignity mattered. Elias understood this more than anyone. He had inherited the lesson from his father, a man who survived atrocities by clinging to dignity when everything else was stolen. That inheritance lived in Elias like blood itself, shaping how he moved, how he invested, how he judged. Tonight, watching Victor unravel, he thought of his father's words. A man who cannot respect others cannot be trusted to lead. He remembered his father's stories of silence in the camps, how quiet was both shield and rebellion, how sometimes restraint preserved life. Elias never forgot that silence was not weakness. It was strategy. It was power disguised as patience. And now, as Victor dismissed Amara with cruelty, Elias felt the weight of that inheritance pressing against his chest. He did not rise. He did not shout. He simply sat, steady as a monument, his eyes sharpening like steel beneath the soft glow of chandeliers. Around him, conversation tried to recover, laughter stuttering back into existence, but the illusion of comfort had shattered. Phones had captured the grip, the insult, the disdain etched into Victor's face. Elias knew how fast such moments traveled, how markets responded to morality as much as numbers. A single clip, 15 seconds long, could collapse years of negotiations. He had seen it happen before. The internet had no patience for arrogance, no forgiveness for prejudice caught in crystal clarity. Victor's empire, built on intimidation, now trembled on the edge of exposure. Elias did not look at Amara directly, though he felt her composure like a steady flame against the storm. He had watched her all evening, not out of curiosity, but out of recognition. Grace under humiliation is rare, and she carried it without theatrics. She did not raise her voice, did not plead, did not break. She remained anchored. He admired that strength. Power, in its most valid form, is quiet endurance, not volume. In her stillness, he saw echoes of his father, of survivors who understood that dignity is not surrendered even when stolen by others. Victor, blind in his arrogance, continued to perform for those around him, his laughter forced, his gestures exaggerated as though confidence could erase what had already burned itself into memory. Elias knew better. He had lived long enough to understand that moments of cruelty always carried consequences. Some consequences arrived slowly, hidden behind boardrooms and lawsuits. Others arrived instantly, sharpened by lenses and amplified by millions of unseen viewers. Tonight belonged to the latter. The string quartet played on, unaware of how their melodies now underscored a tragedy in motion. Each note stretched the tension tighter, violins slicing through silence like whispers of inevitability. Elias let the music wash over him, steadying his breath. He had always found clarity in pauses, in allowing noise to fade, so truth could be heard. In that clarity, he weighed his decision. Profit tempted him. The acquisition of Langston Dynamics promised returns that would secure another generation of wealth. But legacy was not measured in returns. Legacy was measured in character, in the decisions remembered long after numbers were forgotten. His father's ghost, quiet yet insistent, whispered again, "What you build with greed crumbles with time. What you build with dignity lasts forever." Elias turned his glass slowly, watching wine swirl like blood against crystal. He did not drink. He thought of employees he had met over decades, men and women who built companies brick by brick, whose loyalty deserved leaders who saw them as more than tools. Victor was not such a leader. His empire stood tall but hollow, brittle beneath its polished facade. Tonight had revealed the truth, and truth, once revealed, could not be hidden. He shifted slightly in his chair, the slightest movement drawing eyes from across the room. Investors who had been pretending to focus on conversation glanced toward him. Senators tilted their heads. Even Victor, mid-sentence, stole a glance. Elias gave nothing away. His expression remained carved from stone. Yet that silence carried a promise, and those watching understood. Judgment was forming. The atmosphere thickened, as if oxygen itself hesitated. Guests whispered less, choosing instead to watch. The room had become a crucible, each person a witness to arrogance colliding with consequence. Elias sat at its center, unmoving, yet every decision hinged on his perspective. He knew this. He knew the weight his silence carried. Victor believed wealth was insulation. Elias understood that morality was currency, and tonight Victor had gone bankrupt in front of everyone. Amara passed nearby, her tray steady, her expression unbroken. For a fleeting second, Elias's gaze softened. He saw resilience in her, the kind of strength his father had taught him to cherish. It reminded him why he invested not only in profits, but in people, why he had turned down ventures that promised fortune but stank of exploitation. He valued integrity, and integrity tonight stood embodied in a waitress Victor had dismissed as nothing. Elias almost smiled, though the moment passed quickly, replaced by the same calm exterior. He thought of the billions at stake, of headlines, already half-written in unseen newsrooms, of social media feeds buzzing with snippets of cruelty. He imagined hashtags forming, protests swelling, investors fleeing. He could almost hear the ticking of clocks counting down to Victor's fall. In contrast, he imagined Amara's strength becoming a symbol, her calm composure spreading as proof that dignity outlives arrogance. The choice, Elias realized, was not between profit and morality. It was between building something hollow or planting something that could endure. The candles burned lower, wax spilling like time across silver holders. Elias sat, steady as ever, hands folded, eyes sharp, silence wrapping around him like armor. Those who watched him sensed the storm forming in his restraint. They understood instinctively what Victor, blinded by ego, could not. Elias Voss had already decided, and that decision would echo far beyond this ballroom. The ballroom held its breath as if the chandeliers themselves had frozen mid-glow. The sting of Victor's words still lingered, raw and poisonous, while Amara's poise had carved silence sharper than steel. Guests shifted uneasily in their chairs, torn between politeness and disbelief, their eyes darting between the billionaire who believed himself untouchable and the waitress who had refused to bow. Phones glimmered like restless stars, catching angles, preserving seconds, preparing to unleash them to millions who would not forgive cruelty so easily. Then Elias Voss moved. It was not dramatic. He did not rise with force or thunder. He simply placed his napkin on the table, folded it with care, and pushed back his chair with a grace that drew more attention than any explosion of temper could have. The hall quieted further, music faltered, and forks stilled. Elias stood. His height, though softened by age, carried authority carved from decades of decisions that reshaped industries. He tapped his glass once with a finger, not even a fork, yet the sound carried, slicing through the tension. "Enough," he said, voice calm but edged with something final. The word struck harder than any shout. Victor laughed awkwardly, waving, a dismissive hand, trying to reclaim dominance. "Elias, please, no need to dramatize. These things happen with staff. Nothing worth attention." The arrogance dripped like oil. Elias's gaze cut through him, cold, steady, unblinking. He then turned deliberately toward Amara. Every eye followed. Amara, still steady despite the burn on her wrist, stood a few feet away, tray balanced, posture regal without intention. Elias stepped closer, his shoes quiet against polished marble, the weight of anticipation pressing against every chest in the room. He reached her side and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. The entire hall leaned forward as though gravity itself pulled them. "This young woman," Elias began, voice measured, "is not who you believe her to be." Murmurs rippled, quick as wind scattering leaves. Phones raised higher, even the quartet ceased, bows hovering. Victor frowned, eyes narrowing with confusion. Elias's voice did not waver. "This is my daughter, my child, whom I adopted when she was 8. Her name is Amara Voss." The words detonated in the silence. Gasps erupted. Champagne glasses clinked against marble as hands shook. The air snapped like a taut string ready to break. Victor's expression collapsed. arrogance draining from his face, replaced first by disbelief, then horror, then a dawning recognition that his empire had just shifted beneath him. Your daughter, he stammered, but Elias did not look at him. He looked only at Amara, eyes softening in a way few had ever witnessed. She chose to work here, Elias continued, not because she needed wages, but because she wanted to understand, to observe, to study power up close, to see what people become when they believe no one is watching. Tonight she has seen more than enough. Amara inhaled slowly, her composure unwavering, though her heart thundered. Guests whispered furiously, names muttered, hashtags already imagined. The revelation was not only personal, it was seismic. The billionaire who dismissed her as nothing had just discovered she was the very bloodline of the man holding his empire's future. Elias turned finally toward Victor, his stare like ice-cracking glass. You wish to impress me with control. You wish to secure billions. Yet you failed the simplest test. Respect. Victor's mouth opened, but no words came. His throat worked uselessly. The room, once his stage, now mocked him with silence. His empire of intimidation crumbled not through lawsuits or markets, but through a single truth revealed in front of cameras. He had insulted not merely a waitress, but the daughter of the man whose approval he desperately needed. Amara stood taller now, not because wealth had been tied to her name, but because her truth was no longer hidden. She had walked into this room as invisible. She now stood unmissable, a symbol carved from resilience. Guests who had overlooked her now could not look away. They saw dignity, not uniform. They saw strength, not servitude. The chandeliers gleamed brighter as if acknowledging the shift, and the air itself felt transformed. Elias kept his hand gently on her shoulder, steadying her, though she needed no steadiness. He spoke again, softer, but with equal clarity. I raised her to understand that humanity matters more than profit, that dignity defines legacy, and tonight, she reminded me why I believe that. Phones captured every syllable, every flicker of emotion. The internet was already awakening, though no one in that hall could see it yet. They only knew history had turned in their presence. Victor shifted, sweat glistening at his temple, his carefully curated composure unraveling. He tried to laugh, to dismiss, but the sound cracked under pressure. This is absurd. This has nothing to do with business. Elias's gaze pierced him. It has everything to do with business. Business is people. You forget that, and you lose everything. The weight of judgment settled. Conversations sparked around the hall, investors whispering furiously, partners recalculating futures, reputations reshaped in minutes. Amara remained silent, her presence more powerful than speeches. She did not need to gloat, nor did she need to strike back. Her grace was victory enough. Victor sank slightly into his chair, the once towering figure now diminished. His allies shifted away, eyes refusing to meet his. The room no longer belonged to him. It belonged to Amara. She did not seize it. It came to her, drawn to the dignity that radiated effortlessly. Elias's reveal had flipped the narrative, but her composure had sealed it. She was no longer invisible. She was undeniable. The quartet resumed softly, but the melody now sounded different, almost triumphant, echoing the transformation that had occurred. Guests leaned toward one another, voices hushed but urgent, each sentence carrying awe. They had witnessed not only humiliation, but revelation. They had seen power shift without a shout, without violence, without chaos. It had shifted through dignity unveiled. Elias guided Amara toward the head table. She walked with quiet authority, no longer hidden in the background. Victor's eyes followed, but his gaze was hollow, stripped of command. The $3.5 billion deal, once hovering like a crown above him, now dangled by a thread ready to snap. He knew it. Everyone knew it. His downfall had begun, and the architect of it stood calmly at Elias's side, not out of vengeance, but truth. Have you ever been underestimated, dismissed as nothing, only to reveal strength that silenced doubt? Share your moment below, because dignity, once revealed, outshines every arrogance and changes every room it enters. The moment Elias's words left his lips, the world outside the ballroom began to shift. Inside, silence lingered, but beyond those polished doors, phones already carried Victor's downfall into the bloodstream of the internet. A 15-second clip surfaced on Twitter within minutes. Victor gripping Amara's wrist, spitting his insult, Elias rising with quiet authority to declare her his daughter. Captions exploded. Billionaire humiliates waitress, faces investors' wrath. And the momentum was unstoppable. TikTok loops replayed the insult against Amara's serene composure, reactions stitched side by side as users demanded accountability. Instagram stories filled with the hashtag #Justice for Amara, and within hours, it trended globally. What began as a dinner had become a storm. Newsrooms worked at a breakneck pace, screens filled with side-by-side images, Victor's smirk frozen. Against Amara's poise, Elias standing like judgment personified. Anchors leaned forward, voices sharpened with urgency. Tonight, Billionaire CEO Victor Langston faces backlash after a viral video shows him insulting a black waitress during a high-profile dinner in Beverly Hills. The waitress, Amara Jones, has since been revealed as the adopted daughter of investor Elias Voss. Stock tickers crawled across the bottom of every broadcast, flashing red arrows. By morning, Langston Dynamics had dropped 20%, billions in market value evaporating before coffee had cooled. Sponsors scrambled to distance themselves. Statements poured out, cautious, carefully worded apologies for continued association, followed by cancellations of contracts, endorsements, and partnerships. The empire Victor once wielded like a weapon bled credibility in real time. Victor, sitting in his office hours later, watched headlines scroll like a verdict he could not appeal. Langston suspended amid scandal. Deal with Voss Holdings officially terminated. He slammed his desk, but fury changed nothing. Investors had withdrawn. Elias had announced the cancellation of the $3.5 billion acquisition with a single sentence that echoed across networks. Integrity is non-negotiable. That line repeated like gospel, shared across LinkedIn, printed in business journals, retweeted thousands of times by professionals who called it a lesson for every boardroom. Victor's name, once synonymous with ambition, had become shorthand for arrogance. Meanwhile, Amara's image spread like fire. Not staged photographs, not press releases, raw clips of her standing calm while humiliated, her eyes steady as the world tilted. She became a symbol of composure, of grace under cruelty. Hashtags carried her name into millions of feeds. Activists drew strength from her restraint. Young professionals reposted clips with captions like, "This is leadership," and "Power without dignity is nothing." Universities cited her as an example in lectures about ethics. Podcasts dissected the moment, contrasting her quiet authority with Victor's collapse. In less than 24 hours, Amara had gone from invisible to unforgettable. Inside the ballroom that night, the air still hung heavy. Guests whispered, investors typed furiously beneath tables, and staff moved with the awareness that history had just unfolded in their presence. Victor tried to salvage the evening, forcing conversation, but no one returned his gaze. His allies had evaporated, each calculating their distance from his sinking name. Elias sat composed, Amara beside him, the quiet at their table louder than the chatter buzzing elsewhere. When the evening ended, guests left knowing they had not simply attended a dinner but witnessed the turning of an era. the fallout did not slow. By the second day, protesters gathered outside Langston Dynamics headquarters, holding signs scrawled with "Respect ICE Power" and "Justice for Amara." Drone footage captured crowds chanting, their voices echoing against glass towers once built to symbolize control. Employees leaked stories of Victor's long history of intimidation, emails laced with cruelty, firings executed with relish, meetings where humiliation was policy. Those confessions fueled the fire, turning scandal into a movement. Shareholders demanded answers. Their faith eroded. Within 72 hours, the board suspended Victor, citing behavior inconsistent with leadership values. For a man who had believed himself untouchable, the suspension was not merely professional, it was public humiliation, delivered by the very system he once commanded. Elias remained composed through it all, issuing few statements, letting silence again amplify truth. When pressed by reporters, he responded only with, "Dignity matters more than profit. Always." His restraint elevated him further, cementing his reputation as a man whose decisions defined not only industries but morality. Analysts predicted that Voss Holdings, already powerful, would emerge even stronger, its influence rooted not only in capital but in trust. Amara, however, became the actual story. She gave no interviews, no speeches, yet her silence carried more weight than any broadcast. Photos of her leaving the Four Seasons in her simple uniform trended worldwide, captioned with admiration. Commentators wrote essays about her resilience, noting how she had embodied a lesson entire generations craved. That power without respect is fragile, but respect without power can reshape the world. Young women, especially, rallied to her name, describing her as an icon not of victimhood, but of strength. Victor, hidden behind guarded gates, watched his empire fracture. Contracts dissolved, clients fled, friends avoided calls. His arrogance had built walls, but now those walls collapsed inward, trapping him in solitude. He had underestimated a woman he thought beneath him, only to learn she was the one person he could never afford to dismiss. His downfall was poetic in its symmetry. The higher he had built his ego, the steeper his fall became. Global markets adjusted quickly. Langston Dynamics, once a titan, now bled value daily. Analysts questioned whether it could survive under his shadow. Competitors circled like sharks, preparing to consume fragments of the company. Meanwhile, hashtags only grew louder. Videos of Amara hit 50 million views within a week, reactions pouring in from every continent. Her name became a rallying cry for respect across industries, classrooms, and households. She had not spoken, yet her presence spoke for millions. The speed of collapse stunned even Elias, though he showed no surprise. He had long believed that arrogance eventually destroys itself. Tonight had simply accelerated the process. Watching Victor stumble was less satisfying than confirmation. Elias's focus remained on Amara. He saw not only his daughter, but the embodiment of values his father had once instilled: dignity, patience, and strength forged in silence. She had passed a test Victor never knew existed. And in doing so, she had shifted more than a deal. She had shifted culture. The contrast between the quiet ballroom and the roaring world outside defined the fallout. Inside, candles had burned to stubs, wax pooling like melted time. Outside, cities pulsed with protests, hashtags, headlines, and debates. The two worlds collided, but only one held weight now. Arrogance had been exposed, dignity elevated, and the balance of power rewritten before millions of eyes. In the end, Victor learned too late that cruelty carries a cost no fortune can offset. Amara, the woman he dismissed, had risen without effort, her grace the very force that destroyed him. The empire he believed eternal collapsed in days, while the dignity he denied became immortal in memory. What's the cost of disrespect in your life? Comment below. because the price is always higher than arrogance can afford. The sun dipped behind Los Angeles, painting the glass towers of downtown in shades of amber and rose. From the top floor of Voss Holdings, windows stretched across the horizon, capturing every flicker of evening light as though the city itself bowed to the moment. Inside, the office was quiet, sleek, modern, an environment designed not to intimidate but to inspire. White walls carried art chosen not for price but meaning. Shelves displayed books on philosophy, history, and leadership. It was here that Amara Jones, once invisible in a ballroom, now sat behind a polished oak desk, her name freshly engraved on a plaque that read, Director of Corporate Ethics. She ran her hand gently across the lettering, not out of pride, but reflection. Titles had never defined her, dignity had. Yet this position carried more than prestige. It carried responsibility. The role was not ceremonial. Elias had insisted on that. Amara's task was to guide corporations toward accountability, to remind boardrooms that profit without principle was ruin waiting to happen. Her journey had brought her here not by chance, but by resilience. Tonight she would speak to the world. In the days since the incident, her name had traveled farther than she could have imagined. Clips of her calm composure had reached classrooms in London, boardrooms in Sydney, and protests in New York. Students studied her as a symbol of grace under pressure. Analysts dissected her silence as a new model of leadership. She had been invited onto talk shows, offered book deals, and courted by foundations. Yet she declined most, choosing instead to remain intentional. When she finally agreed to address the world, she wanted it to matter. Elias supported her, guiding but never controlling. He reminded her that influence is not about speaking often, but speaking when it counts. Tonight was that moment. The studio was simple. A single chair, a backdrop of the city glowing beneath the evening sky, a camera streaming live across every platform. Millions waited. On phones, laptops, televisions, curious to hear the voice behind the dignity they had witnessed. Amara breathed deeply, steadying herself as she had countless nights when silence was her only shield. Then the red light blinked, alive, and the world leaned in. "Good evening," she began, her tone calm, warm, unshaken. "Many of you know me now because of a moment where cruelty tried to diminish me, where arrogance attempted to strip dignity from my name. But I am not here to speak only about that moment. I am here to speak about what it revealed." She paused, letting her words settle. The city glowed behind her, a living testament to resilience. "I grew up raising my brother. After our mother passed, I worked nights, studied days, and learned that invisibility can be both a burden and a power. I chose to serve in rooms filled with wealth, not because I lacked choices, but because I wanted to understand what power looked like when it thought no one important was watching. What I found is simple. Power without respect is fragile. Wealth without humanity collapses. Leadership without dignity is failure waiting to unfold." Her voice strengthened, each sentence deliberate. "I was underestimated, dismissed, labeled. But what matters is not what others call you. What matters is how you stand when they try to erase you. Dignity isn't given, it's lived, and no one, no matter their title, can take it away unless you surrender it." The live stream comments erupted, hearts and applause flooding across screens, but she stayed focused, steady as a flame, unbothered by wind. She leaned slightly forward, eyes burning with quiet conviction. "This is bigger than me. This is about every worker who has been disrespected, every student dismissed, every voice silenced by arrogance. It is about every person who has been told they are less. I stand here tonight to tell you, you are not less. You are not invisible. Your dignity is your power." Her words resonated across time zones, through earbuds and boardrooms alike. Teachers played her speech live in classrooms. Activists streamed it at rallies. Families watched together, some with tears, others with pride. The world had found not just a story, but a leader. Amara continued, her tone shifting from reflection to vision. In this role, I will dedicate myself to building a future where corporations remember humanity, where respect is not optional but foundational. Where no deal is worth more than dignity, we must demand accountability not only from leaders but from ourselves. Respect is the baseline, not the ceiling. Her gaze softened slightly, a glimmer of vulnerability breaking through composure. I never imagined this path. I only imagined keeping my promises. To my brother, to my mother, to myself. But life has shown me that sometimes the smallest acts of composure can shake the largest empires. And if my silence in one moment could change the course of an empire, imagine what our collective voices can do together. The speech built like a crescendo, quiet, yet unstoppable. We cannot let arrogance go unchallenged. We cannot allow disrespect to stand as normal. And we cannot forget that change does not begin in headlines. It begins in hearts. So I ask you, not as a director, not as a symbol, but as a human being, stand with dignity in your own lives. Demand it, defend it, live it. She paused, then delivered the final words with clarity that pierced across the globe. If you believe respect is the baseline, like, share, and comment to spread this story. Let's show the world what matters. The red light blinked off. The city outside glowed brighter, as though sunset itself applauded. Amara exhaled, steady, knowing the message had left her hands and entered the world. Elias stepped from the shadows of the studio, his face softened with pride. He said nothing, but his silence spoke volumes. She had done more than rise. She had redefined power.